Jennifer and Coco. I hope y'all have a wonderful day today, because we're going to be diving right back in to our family language, or our family familial systems with our Flaunal avian culture. So I hope everyone's hot chocolate ready, because we're going to be diving in. Okay, so, as I mentioned I would do last time, I have off-screen changed our lineage sheet from looking like this mess here to something much more organized and much more understandable. Let me zoom about it a little bit so that way y'all can see it a little bit in fuller detail. It may not be fantastic, but you should be able to get a sense of what's going on here. So, let me zoom in just a little bit. So we start with, let's look at these three columns first. So first you have, what's essentially this black box here is you. You are one of these siblings here. So these close siblings would be your nestmates. And this is the people you would grow up with at the same time as, and share the nest with as you're growing up. And you would also have your older and your younger sets of siblings, and you would have your parents as well. And so this box here is just your immediate family as you are growing up. And then above us we have our, and I also remind you that in this orange it represents the female avian participant of each mating, the female avian creature. Green is our Flaunal creature, and blue is our masculine avian creature. And respectively I've used feminine, gender neutral, and masculine terms for each of these throughout. So that's why you'll see parental versus paternal versus maternal used throughout this. So going back, so up here, these are the people you are related to through your Flaunal parents. So essentially your parental grandparents, as it were. So these would be all your aunts and uncles, and I'm using the term uncle here. I don't know if that's I don't know how widely the term is used, but I do believe I don't think I made that up entirely. We'll just leave that at that. Regardless, it suits our purposes here of being a gender-neutral term for aunt and uncle. So, here we have, so, yeah, and I've kind of maintained with there's a reason why I put the parental thing on the parental side of your family above your own side, and I'll get to that in a moment. But aside from that whole lineage thing, within each I've maintained it goes feminine, neutral, and then, or feminine, plant, masculine. And you'll see that repeated throughout, with the eldest child being on top in each of the children scenarios. So going back over here, so you would have 9 sets of grandparents, 3 for each of your parents. You would have 3 parents, of course. So, and depending on who you are, your mother and father who gave birth to you, or who gave birth to your siblings, as the case may be, and then your parent who houses you, and potentially gave birth to you. You would also have all the aunts, uncles, and uncles on your parental side. And the importance of this is that the eldest, anyone that is older than any of your parents' siblings that are older than them, and remember I'm using sibling here in the referring to plant sense, but any of these siblings here that are older than your own Flaunal parent have precedence over your family as far as like head of household positions. And so there's a respect thing, particularly with the oldest one having a particular level of respect. And this is where we're going to get into some of our language stuff of there is going to be a specific term meaning like head of household or eldest child or such. So essentially denoting not only are you there's going to be a specific term that we're going to be using there, and probably multiple terms. One meaning like you are the eldest sibling of this family, but not necessarily the eldest sibling of the household, as it were, because there is another family that has and that has a higher rank over us. Okay. And looking down, you essentially get the same things for your maternal and your paternal side, although while there is designations of those older and younger uncles, it's not as important culturally because those are different households. It is just your parental, because you will live with your, at least if you're Flaunal, you're going to live with your parental household. And if you are Avian, when you marry into your new spouse, when you marry your spouse, you're going to move into their household, and their positioning among their household is going to matter. And this Gen 0, Gen 1 is kind of continuing the same concept, just over to among you, your spouses, your sibling spouses, your cousin spouses, and all the children thereof. I did not include every potential cousin, only the most important one, essentially the head of household. So if you have essentially the oldest parental uncle, their oldest child would be the head of household, and so their children would be of significance, particularly their own eldest child, because that child would become the next head, is lined up to become the next head of household. So, one thing I've not put much thought into is what happens when, let's say this eldest child here passes away and before they've had a chance to produce an heir to the household. I haven't thought anything about what would happen in that case, of who would get it next. Would it be one of their siblings? Would it be one of their uncles? It's something to consider, because there's some, and it may be something I leave open, and that is something that gets fought over, and because it's an unusual circumstance, but one that does happen. So, next things you have. So this is this. So let's talk about some of how this is going to affect language. I'm going to pull up our language notes here. So some things we have, familial wise. So maybe honorifics may not be the best title here. As I just tossed the calculator around. Yeah, so familial honorifics. You have options. So one thing we mentioned we're going to note, denote eldest child. And I think some of these, and that term specifically, I think might even become like a part of their name. Because one thing I have not thought much about is like, are there familial names, and how do those come about? Do those come before or after personal names and such? Where do titles fit into this? And so some of those questions are ones to be answered as we continue on. So, we could, yeah. But we'll get into more about naming later. Right now we're still just worried about, we're still considering formality honorifics. So I was just about to say, it's an interesting thing if we stay related. I think I may have even said this term a lot last episode, but it's kind of an interesting thought of there's going to be a lot of idioms that we just simply cannot use or would be very, very differently understood among these creatures just because of different physiologies. And one of those terms is related by blood. They're not going to have, of at least the Flaunal side of the creatures, won't have that because essentially they have no blood. They are plant species. They would have their own, with their own circulatory systems of their own design that is not hemoglobin based, at least to my understanding. I may be wrong in this. Plants may have hemoglobin, but at the very least, they don't have red blood. So, that's another, actually. Let me just... language. Differences... Yeah, let me just put other physiological differences, such as feet, hands, wings, if they see this as analogs or not. Blood. Okay, so, yeah, alright, so, sorry, got on that sidetrack there. Let's come back into family, formality, honorifics, and such. So, we have mentioned that we have the Sudanese system here. I'll also add in the mention, I had mentioned this to some of my friends the other day, but if you were to go from every generation, from your grandparents to their great-great-grandchildren, to all of their great-great-grandchildren, so essentially Gen 2, from Gen -2 to Gen 2, not including spouses, you would have over 11,000, or not 11,000, 1,100 different terms for each or different unique terms to describe various relations to you. That is a lot. This is very much within... This is very much a Sudanese system, very much has some of the complexity, from what I understand, of some of the Eastern languages. I'm not sure how much I want that complexity, but I don't want to shy away from it either. One potential option I had considered is that instead of it being fully Sudanese at this point in time, is that it is becoming that way. You kind of have this concatenation that I have of like older parental uncle's wife, older parental uncle, and such, where you kind of have these multiple terms, but they're starting to show elements of fusing together. And some of them are becoming shorter and shorter to where they're becoming singular more and more. So it's becoming more and more unique terms, but there's still a clear pattern to it at this point. So figuring out which term to use is not necessarily difficult once you know the pattern, for the most part. But essentially, we're close to exceptions for uniqueness and exceptions starting to form as language change. I think that's where we're going to be. I want it to be on the verge of becoming super complex. The other thing I haven't talked much about, which is part of why we've created this whole... the second reason why we've created this family tree here is not just for figuring out how inheritance lines work, but also for figuring out avian mating eligibility. And that's something we'll get to later. I don't really want to think much about that right now. Again, it's not important for our familial ties and such. So we will come back to that. Now, we have... Okay. So what is our next step here? We've come up with a family, or a way of denoting kinship terminology. Now we need to figure out how that is used on a regular basis, as well as how other honorifics and titles come into being. For instance, our can you, when you're referring to someone you're related to, do you always use the familiar or the kinship term as well, or do you exclusively use the kinship term and only use their name to establish who it is initially, and then from there you only use the kinship term? Do you There's some good questions here. So, let's see. We have some options, as we always do. So one thing I've mentioned is I think the eldest child term is going to be a title almost, or a title of sorts, as it may be. You have various terms here, so let's see. Yeah. So let's see. So denoting the eldest children with titles, and there could be different levels of titles for this as well. So I think that these will get kind of conglomerated onto names as time goes on, so that if some of this honorific system fades away, some of these titles may just get kind of glommed into the name, sort of like, and it's kind of a similar way that, like, we have the last name Davidson, meaning son of David. We don't perceive it as really being that anymore. It's a name. It's Davidson. But there is that, like, history there of that used to be just kind of like not necessarily a title, but a specific method to denote relation, or almost like how things like Smith and such used to be just occupational names, and now they've also become last names just because of how they were used. So that is one option. So let's see. Yeah, denoting eldest child with title. Various titles for various levels of or specific title here. Specific title depends on, we'll call it familial position for now. So you would have ones for head of household. So you have at least two. You'd have one for the head of household, for at least the current head of household, if not like all who are supposed to be head of households. You would have one for just a generic oldest child. So essentially the oldest child of a non-oldest child, as it were. So if you're the firstborn if you're the first Flaunal born of a Flaunal who is not firstborn, that sounds way more complicating than it really is. Okay. But head of household, eldest child. I don't think we need any others for this specifically. There may be one for if we have that, we could almost say, so yeah, some of these, as we get further down the list, we're getting into less and less likely here, but... And then after that, you would have, there would be no need for... So yeah, for sure there is one for head of household. For sure there is one for the eldest child of a family that is not destined to be head of household. There is one for... It is possible that there is a term for non-eldest children of a head of household, and there's possible that there is one for, although less likely than any of the others, there's one for non-eldest children of an eldest child. And these things would essentially be part of the figuring out who is to take reign after, should there be no present, or no head of household, no one with the head of household title left to hold that distinction. So, and I'm not sure whether age or furthest along the line would take precedence. It is an interesting question. I could see them all. I could see both having equal claims to the position. So it's something I think I want to figure out later. If I figure it out at all, or if I just leave it to... That's when you get Family Feud starting, or family infighting, and potentially splitting up of households as that, due to such. So, yeah, I think that this is a fair way to, I think this is a good start for some of our titles, some of our honorifics, as it were. So we know that eldest children are seen as eldest children are seen as favored in this society, just because that they have the head of household. They have the primary inheritance rights. Flaunal creatures live with their or stay with their families essentially for life, unless they move to start a new household and to claim their own. Let's see, carrying on, you have... So other things would be like, what terms would you use for... How do they view age differentials and generation differentials, and how do they respect those? How do they respect... so like, is youth favored? Is age favored? think to some degree age must be favored if they're picking eldest children. And one thing would be, I would imagine that the head of household, that the oldest head of household would likely be kind of the ultimate top dog. There may even be a term for that. Like current head of household versus potential head of household, essentially heir to the throne, as it were. So a differential between like king and prince, so to speak. So you have all of these here. Okay, so next, let's see, to know eldest children with title, older age is considered respectable. Okay. So older age is considered respectable. So formality will be denoted to. Yeah, things that formality will be denoted in. Formality will be denoted for those who are for the elderly, for eldest children, and potentially for the close siblings of an eldest child as well, although I'm not certain on that. Or not siblings, the brother and sister. Let me make sure I'm using the terms correctly here if I'm going to use them. The brother and sister of a eldest sibling, it is possible that they would get some passed on weight, although I'm not sure that's going to be something as formalized, at least into the speech. Let's see, other things. You would have... Oh, and then also, we're getting into some less familial stuff here, but Flaunal creatures, at this point I see having, because of just how things are forming right now, Flaunal creatures are seen as respectable over avian creatures to a certain extent. I don't think it's going to be a large distinction, but it will be there will be some distinction to be made. So, okay. Our next steps with this. Without having actual words here, I think we're going to start running into I think we're going to start running into the limits of what we can and cannot do. That said, there are some other things we can consider. Just going back to this, so we have some. So we have some answers to questions adjacent to these, if not these, the questions themselves that we posed last time. So we have not answered whether or not we account for gender or noun class, although at the same time we kind of have, because we have denoted that at the very least Flaunal creatures are seen as slightly higher on that. So if we go for the gender route, that would make sense. If we go for the animacy route, that could actually still be encoded in there. Let me go back over to that sheet for a moment and see what we had discussed here. So with our gender ideas, so we had discussed potentially doing Okay, yeah. So we had discussed two options, as far as like animacy and gender roles, and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive either. Of doing Flaunal over definitely higher than Avian, which fits with the other things we have patterns so far. With potentially within the Avian either doing a masculine feminine or a feminine masculine denotation, and with one higher than the other. I think at this point I don't really want to denote feminine over masculine in any way among the avian creatures. So I think for that very reason, I think we'll leave gender roles strictly as Flaunal avian distinctions. So it'll be more of an animacy almost, although that's a tricky way to put it. Alright, so, but I think that answers our question of, yes, yes, our honorifics and our formality should, our noun class and our honorifics are not are something that can account for each other. So, which could potentially, one thing we had talked about is if we do not evolve this animacy distinction, that you need to be, that a bird, or that a tree, an inanimate, non-sentient tree would be, you would have to deliver more respect to than your brother. Or even your own mom. Which is a weird quirk. I almost kind of curious, like, practically speaking, that wouldn't happen. I don't think that would happen in the pragmatics, or at least it wouldn't feel that way. However, technically speaking, that would be an accurate assessment. I'm almost curious to go with that, just for that, just to run with that quirk some. I'm not certain I will, but I'm not certain I won't either at this point. It's something we'll put a pin in of, it is possible that if we don't denote an animate distinction, or a lower animate distinction, then some bizarre things might happen with the honorifics and formality system. So, let's just say it would put a very, very interesting twist on the giving tree. Okay. Well, I think anything about this language is going to put an interesting twist on the giving tree. That might be a translation, a fun little translation challenge later once we're actually able to do that. Of translating a story about essentially a sapient plant. Yeah. It'd be a non-canon story, but I think it'd be an interesting challenge. We'll come back to that when we actually have enough of a language to do that. Going back. Yes, our honorifics in our noun class system, they're going to have some interaction with each other. How complex is this system? How complex, how pervasive? I think it's going to be, I want it to be fairly robust. We've already established that there's going to be quite a number of titles, or at least the potential for quite a number of titles, which I think would, while sheer number does not alone account for complexity, it definitely does not account for simplicity either. And how pervasive is it? I want this to be very pervasive, enough so that it winds up getting baked into the language. In unexpected ways. So, I don't yet, but aside from just specific terms, I don't know how much else we're going to be going with this. That said, like, I don't know how much like these are going to affect verbs or other nouns. There's some things to keep in mind on this as well for the future. Let's see. So that actually comes up with an interesting thing of going to our verbs. How much do we want to denote politeness onto our own verbs? It's an interesting thought. I think that's one that would make sense with this. Of having some form of politeness marking. Okay, I might actually delete this, or clear this out at least, because it's not super useful for us anymore. Okay. So actually, known titles we have. Let's copy over those terms that we had mentioned here earlier. It's not quite how I wanted them to paste. Okay, we'll fix these. So, yeah, we know that these two are for certain. Let's put known and potential, if I can spell correctly, potential titles. Awesome. So, and here's some of our list. Actually, ta-da. Alright, known and potential titles. There we have some. As we carry on, so some things that are encoded. Verbs. Denote politeness / formality. And I don't know, I'm not sure how we'll go into this. This is something we'll have to do research on. So I'll make a note of that. Formality, politeness of verbs. Okay, so I've made a note of that. Okay, so these are some options, these are some. So those are some of the highest familial terms that there are. Parents would, of course, or various. Let's see. I'm just gonna put just familial terms under here because those are all. There's going to be quite a significant number of those, and I am, as I mentioned earlier, and I am not writing them all here right now. Because that would get a bit much. Okay. Is there anything else to discuss on here at this point? I think we've hit the end of what I'm able to discuss right now. We'll come back next week. I will probably break away from talking more about familial terms, or not next week, next Friday. I'll probably break away from talking more about familial terms, just because we've spent a lot of time on them so far. And I want to look at some of the other parts of our language again, now that we have some of these, some more of these thoughts going into the language now. Such as, actually, next week we might start looking into our phonology and how that's going to play out, as well as taking a look at, sorry, got lost there for a moment. Going back to looking at our goals again. Yeah, looking back at our phonology, and discussing that, as well as discussing just a few other features relating to verbs, nouns, and such, things that we'll think are important as we carry on with this. That said, thank you for everyone who joined me today. I will be, if you would like to see more of me today, I will be hopping over to Twitch in a moment to play some games. I don't know what at this current moment. Maybe Skyrim, maybe something else. We'll find out in a moment as we'll see. But I'm gonna hop on there about noon. So feel free to join me there if you'd like. Thank you for everyone who joined me today. I hope you'll have a wonderful rest of your days, and I will see you at 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time here on Friday. Thank you for joining, and have a wonderful rest of your day.